Welcome to the National Research Collaborative for Foster Alumni and Higher Education webinar series. We are pleased today to have Dr. Sierra Collins with us. This information will all be recorded and available on the NRC FAAG website listed here. So if you want to share the webinar with anybody or refer back to it, it will be posted there within a week or so, along with all the PowerPoint kind of information as well too. If you or anyone else that you know are interested in potentially presenting in a future webinar, please contact Dr. Amy Salazar. So today we have with us, as I was saying, Dr. Sierra Collins. She is an associate at ABT Associates with her PhD from the University of Connecticut's Human Development and Family Sciences Department. So we're excited to have her with us today. She'll give a presentation and we'll go ahead and just type questions into the chat that we can address at the end of the presentation. So with that, I'll go ahead and I will hand it off to Dr. Collins.
Thank you. My name is Kiera Collins, pronunciation, and then my company is APT. I know it's an ABT is often thought it's an acronym, but it is a person's name, our founder's name. So APT Associates, if anyone's heard of them. Give me 1 second to share my screen. And get into great. Hold on, there we go. Nope. We did practice this. I am just trying to figure out, there we go, how to, wow, so tiny. Get into presenter mode. Okay, whew, there we go. Thank you so much. So today I will be talking about an evaluation of 2 Georgia College campus support programs for students with experience in foster care. And I have a couple of people on the call that worked with me on this. So I will just acknowledge them. They are all listed there, evaluation team members. So Amy Salazar, who runs these, was also part of the project team, the evaluation team, as well as the rest of the folks listed here. We all met at the National Conference for Hidden Student Populations a couple years ago in the spring of 2020, right before COVID started, which will have an impact on what I'm going to share today. And so we did just want to acknowledge that starting point and connection for how we all became a research team, and then also acknowledge and thank the program staff and students at the college, at the Georgia institutions that participated in this evaluation. If you have any clarification questions, Jenna's going to keep an eye on the chat and let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to try and get through these so that we can have at least 15 to 20 minutes to talk about any questions or go back through anything in more detail. I have picked and chosen what I think will be most relevant, but to the extent that anyone wants me to go back into something in more detail, please let me know. I will be focusing on campus support programs, what they are, and the specific ones that we worked with in Georgia, our evaluation methods, our findings, and then our lessons learned. So a little bit of the background of campus support programs. I know a lot of different people come to these and there's a lot of different topics. So some people might know everything about campus support programs and others on the call might not know as much. Usually campus support programs in general focus on financial, academic, and social emotional support. For the programs that we worked with, they were specifically working with students with experience in foster care and or homelessness, campus support programs can have other populations of focus in addition to those that often look at the same types of things or focus on, have the same types of interventions and activities. They are not always, but can often be designed as a one-stop shop for students to get support. And specifically for campus support programs for students with experience in foster care, they began in the 90s and now there are hundreds across the country. However, despite that more than 20-year, being in existence for more than 20 years, the evidence base is pretty limited, and that's often because they don't have a lot of program evaluation or outcome-based research on them. So the background of the setting in Georgia is that Georgia, a number of years ago, created the Embark Georgia statewide network. It is focused on having all 2- and 4-year public institutions in Georgia have a designated point of contact for students experiencing foster care. It is important to note that it is not a funded mandate, and often these designated points of contact are not funded positions to focus fully on students with experience in foster care. And so that can often mean that they are folks at institutions that already hold other roles that then get this added on to their plate. For some institutions, they have tried to build out their program and fund the positions so that there is some kind of dedicated space to working with and supporting students with experience in foster care and or homelessness. The Embark Georgia network is also has an aim to connect the child welfare systems as well as both the K through 12 and higher education systems in Georgia. So that's kind of the backdrop of the programs and what's going on in the state of Georgia. The 2 campus support programs that we worked with for this, we chose because they were both dedicated to growing that designated point of contact, DPOC role. They both provided robust programming. So some institutions in Georgia have a DPOC, but they don't have programming specific for students with experience in foster care. And they had large populations of students with experience in foster care, SCFC, as we're calling them, and they had models, or they were considered to be models of best practices for these programs in Georgia. And we'll kind of talk about, there were still gaps in what the programs were doing, and yet they were kind of doing, some of the institutions doing the most and best work in Georgia. So a little bit more about each specific college is that we worked with 2 campus support programs. One was housed within a 2-year technical college, and one was housed within a 4-year university. You'll see on these slides, but both were large and suburban institutions. The technical college's program goals were to increase graduation and certificate completion. They had 2 staff members dedicated to the program, and students were eligible or could indicate their eligibility by self-identifying through a self-disclosure form during orientation. The services that they provided included one-on-one meetings with program staff, scholarships, a book and school supplies lending library, workshops, and specialized advising. I will note here and kind of bring it up in other points as it applies. The technical college had, so as I mentioned, we all got together in spring, I think February of 2020. We started talking to colleges in the spring of 2020, and our data collection start point was fall of 2020. So we were looking at data from fall of 2020 to spring of 2021. And we were looking at like administrative data and interviewing students who participated during those semesters. Because that was the height of COVID, that impacted a lot of the norms or intentions of what the programs had intended to do, and or what they had been doing previously to COVID-19. So the technical college had some activities in fall of 2019, and that just didn't really continue during COVID. And so because of that, we didn't get a lot of student feedback. And so the student perspective of this program and just the level of services and participation was a lot less for the technical college. And we have a little bit more robust findings across semesters and both from students and staff for the university. But we'll kind of include information that we have about the technical college, but it'll kind of just setting that out there. These services were provided at some point, but to the extent that they weren't always all provided every semester, and they weren't ever fully realized during those COVID months as they had intended to be. So then the university, as I mentioned, was large and suburban as well. Its self-stated goals were to reduce academic, economic, and socioeconomic barriers to retention and graduation. As you can see here, they had a more robust staff. They had 5 full-time staff, 8 part-time staff and student workers, 7 case management interns, and 2 full-time AmeriCorps Vistas. Their eligibility was similar in that students self-identified through self-disclosure forms, but that form was on the program website. Students could also be referred by other campus departments or child welfare professionals. So if, that they were working with outside of the school, part of that connecting the systems. The university program also had a general program that was geared towards students experiencing foster care and students who were experiencing homelessness. And so they had some general services that were intended for both of those populations, including emergency financial assistance, a food pantry, and one-on-one case management. Students with experience in foster care might have just engaged with the program at this kind of general level, which often saw less participation, less engagement with the program. And then there was a sub program or more specific program for students with experience in foster care that included wraparound support services. This program could also be for students experiencing homelessness. It was just a much more focused, intensive program within the larger general services. And so it had wraparound support services, a full-time retention coordinator and case manager, a summer bridge week, peer mentors, more intense and focused workshops, a cultural and education abroad enrichment activities, and then an optional living learning village. Our research questions were organized around these 3 things. One, was each campus support program successful at offering its content as intended based on the program logic model? And if not, what were some of the barriers to implementing as planned? The second question was, what were the CSPs doing well? And the third was, where can they make improvements? So I'm first going to talk a little bit about our process of evaluation, and then I'll get into the findings by research question. Like I said, we began in 2020, and we began by meeting with the program staff at both institutions and getting a logic model written down and formalized. So both programs identified using the KC7, I've said this so many times, the Casey Family Program 7 life domains as kind of a guiding framework for their program. So that was included in the logic model. It was also how we based a lot of our framing of the evaluation and collection of qualitative data. It was also a really important start to, I'll come back to this, but it was a really important start to start with the logic model to get really formalized about what the programs thought they were doing, what services and activities were related to their goals and the activities, and then what outcomes were they expecting to impact. As far as our kind of process and outcome information and data, we collected program data from each institution that included de-identified but by student who participated in which services and activities by semester, as well as administrative data. So the administrative data for the technical college was their GPA and their, like whether or not they were on academic, I'm forgetting the words that they use, academic probation, basically. And then for the university, it was GPA and course completion, credit completion per semester. And so we got that data for the program participants, de-identified, but individualized, so we could see that individual data by participant. And then we got aggregated data for comparison groups, which I'll mention, I think, on one of our next slides. Actually, yeah, let me go. So the quantitative data, here it is. Our comparison groups were all undergraduate students, all first-generation undergraduate students, and all undergraduate students who checked board of the court on the FAFSA. I'll come back around to this, but an asterisk to this is I'm mentioning that we had individual level data on the students with experience in foster care in the program because we didn't have individual level data on the comparison groups, which meant that we couldn't duplicate who was in which group, and we couldn't, it limited the number of analyses we could do because we only had aggregate numbers by semester. Our qualitative data, we conducted both student and staff interviews. The student interviews asked about students' experience with the program, what positive, negative experiences they had. It asked about the 7 life domains, and it asked about current and future personal development, how they define success in and after college. The staff interviews, we actually did 2 rounds. Our initial interviews asked about the staff members' role in the program's mission and evolution, perceptions of quality of support provided, and areas of growth. We did those pretty early on, those initial staff interviews, and then we did student interviews. And based on the information we got from the student interviews and the admin data, it led us to kind of come back around and do formal staff and follow-up staff interviews to better understand what staff thought the impact of COVID-19 was on their programs and students' participation in services, and whether the CSP was back to pre-COVID functioning, as well as give them an opportunity to say, like, you know, here's what we're seeing. It's also been, you know, we started this in 2020. We didn't finish data collection until the beginning of the end of 2021 and beginning of 2022. So, and like analysis and stuff. So it also gave kind of, you know, a passage of time for staff to reflect back on after more time had passed and COVID was a little bit better known than when we started off. And so findings, this research question 1, we primarily pulled feedback from the staff, just because staff and students, because the staff were the ones that told us what should be happening. And then based on the staff information and what the students' feedback was, kind of, we just, you know, and also the admin, the program data of like what students were participating in, kind of determined how successful they were at offering the content based on that logic model and what were some of the barriers. So for the technical college, they had 7 students in fall 2019. Sorry, I'm just thinking. So I might have said this wrong. Our data went from fall 2019 to spring 2021, 4 semesters. So I might have said fall 2020 before. But so fall 2019, before COVID, we had those 7 students in the technical college. They indicated that they used the 7 life domains framework. And one highlight of their participation in that fall 2019 was this 100% engagement and financial aid advisor workshop. Some of the barriers, And as I mentioned, as they went forward, they offered a lot less activities, and that was because of their barriers. So COVID-19 resulted in almost no programming in direct and indirect ways, just as staff were figuring out how to do things virtually. There were both student and staff slow uptakes in that process. So technology issues were the result of students not having maybe technology to engage virtually, but also staff reporting their own technology issues of figuring out how to meet with students and provide services virtually and engage students virtually. And that kind of related to this third thing that staff mentioned, having generational communication differences of not necessarily initially texting or finding it really hard to engage students after having relied on in-person communication with students and meetings with students before COVID-19, and feeling like that really dropped off. And also feeling like because students were not in person with anyone else at the university, other students, other staff in their classes, there was less knowledge about the program and less word of mouth than there would have normally been, or what the staff thought had been happening before. So for the university, between fall 2019 and spring 2021, they served a total of 77 students. They also used the 7 life domains framework. They had their most frequently attended service was case management meetings, one-on-one case management meetings between students and staff. And a lot of students had really positive feedback about the program. We'll talk a little bit more about the things that students said could be improved, but overall, a lot of positive things were said by students about the program and what they received, how it was implemented, the services, etc. The university staff also, mentioned COVID-19 resulted in restricted programming. An interesting thing that the university mentioned is that variations in funding also resulted in varying services provided from semester to semester. And this was both related to COVID-19, but also a general issue that staff mentioned as impacting service delivery and program kind of fidelity to their logic model and the services they intend to provide, is just having a lot of the program being primarily donor funded. When donors did not fund, that meant that they had to cut things and they couldn't support students in the way that they had wanted to or anticipated being able to. Additionally, staff noted that there is sometimes a student aversion to help seeking or self-identifying as students with experience in foster care that has continuously presented, not related to COVID-19, as a barrier to reaching students and engaging students and providing services and supports to students with experience in foster care. That idea that students have to self-identify and not just self-identify, but self-identify on a form that they don't necessarily need to fill out on the website. So it means that there might be a lot of students that don't necessarily know about the program, but then even if they do know about the program, if students don't want to identify with that or don't want to acknowledge or kind of identify with that foster care identity once they go to college, then they might be missing out on supports that could help them, and the staff have no other kind of ability to help or reach out without their initial engagement, unless, of course, for the university, if there were referrals being made. And sometimes there were students mentioned a warm handoff between maybe a social worker or some other person involved with the child welfare system, and kind of connecting them with the program at the university. So what CSPs are doing well? So I start off with some of the admin data. As I said, there are some definite limitations to this data, but I think there are some definite pros that include data from more than just the program. We have some pretty small sample sizes, and so there's nothing definitive that can be said both about these individual programs, but also in general about the students' outcomes. But looking at and comparing with those other comparison groups, as a reminder, all undergraduate students, all first generation students, and all students who checked ward of the court on their FAFSA are our comparison groups. And we would imagine that the students in the CSP that we're looking at would all be in the ward of court category and all be in the all undergraduate student category. And then there will be some, we anticipate that there's some overlap in that first generation undergraduate student category, but it's just unknown how much or to what degree or who. So for the technical college, they had t-tests showing no statistically significant differences between the SEFC group and comparison groups on average GPA, or that's it, students, percent of students on academic alert. We just looked at fall 2019 because basically almost no services were provided in the other semesters. This will show up multiple times, but we interpreted this finding, again, preliminarily, as a positive finding, even because it suggests that students with experience in foster care were achieving the same grades as all undergraduate students and other comparison populations, which is a positive if you consider the additional stressors and factors in life histories and experiences that students in the campus support program or just who have checked ward of court on their FAFSA are experiencing. For the university, the individual comparisons by semester varied. I've just highlighted kind of the overall story is that there were some significant differences in average GPA. Most semesters, there was no statistically significant difference between the SEFC and comparison groups. But I believe in every semester, SEFC had statistically significantly lower credit completion than at least one other comparison group, and sometimes all comparison groups. So the story that this kind of suggests or implies preliminarily is that they are achieving the same grades, but at a slower rate than the other comparison groups. And again, because this changed from semester to semester, and also because the technical college we're only looking at one semester, it's entirely possible that some of these are just blips, but we didn't see, so that's why we wouldn't kind of highlight any one semester's findings. But I think it is important, kind of, we can see, I think, consistently in the university over the 4 semesters that they weren't doing significantly worse, and that they were either hanging around the same kind of credit completion stats or a little bit lower. And then for the qualitative feedback, again, about what CSPs were doing well, for the technical college, we only have staff feedback. We did complete 2 interviews with students at the technical college CSP, but we didn't include any of their feedback either in our paper or in this presentation because the sample size was so small. We didn't want to provide any kind of feedback that might be identifying. Our sample size for the university was only 7, so it's not much bigger, but we tried to include feedback that wouldn't be too identifying of the students. And so the things that both staff and students said is that the things that were working well were establishing supportive relationships with students. Both staff and students thought they were doing a good job on that. Supporting students' stability across those 7 life domains. So we will talk a little bit more about this. There's a lot of detail in the paper and nuances about which domains were talked about more, which domains students thought were going better or worse. and where those recommendations for improvements were. But at least one student said that the program was working on all, like, I guess all 7 domains were mentioned by at least one student as going well, and all 7 domains were mentioned by at least one student as needing improvements or not going well. So there's a range of responses, but overall, like I said, there's a lot of positive feedback about how the program was working across students and domains. And then both students and staff thought that staff was doing a good job of creating a welcoming campus experience overall. So what areas can the CSPs make improvements? The technical college staff said that they needed to improve their outreach strategies and humanizing their services and focusing on student well-being. I'm not going to spend a lot of time going into that because I want to get to some of the kind of implications. The university staff said that you can see both staff and students said that additional financial support was necessary, and that feeds back into that kind of donor funding that staff acknowledged before as a barrier, and kind of recognizing ways in which the program was in a lot of ways not receiving as much funding, or it was a really difficult for staff to constantly be trying to secure funding. And also the ways in which that trickled down into what they were actually able to provide to students, both tangibly in scholarships and financial help and assistance, but also intangibly in just the services that they were able to provide. Students really focused on workshops, and one thing to note here is that in a lot of the students that we interviewed were in that kind of more specialized group, and a lot of them were living in those living learning village, that live learn village housing. So those students had higher requirements for engagement, for being able to live in that live learn community. And I think a lot of the negative feedback or improvements we received from students were related to that. So the workshops that they had to go to be part of that program, and the engagement requirements to be in the live learn community, to receive financial assistance, etc. Students thought that they should be more tailored to their needs and schedules, both on topics and also working around work and class schedules. And one point to note, I think, for people that might be on the call that are researching, evaluating, or providing these programs, staff viewed engagement requirements as incentives, where students viewed them as kind of punitive, and it created a really negative impression of the program, especially when they felt like workshops weren't really worth their time or getting at the needs that they had identified. So just noting that as like no right perspective, but a point of difference between the staff and students. And then students also, a couple students mentioned wanting informal opportunities to connect with peers, or informal environments to create more peer relationships. They felt like the program was doing a really good job on the staff to student relationships, but not as much on the student to student relationships, especially in, I think, the live learn house, and a lot of those were kind of related to normal things that come up when you live with another person. That just, those resolving issues weren't happening in ways that students wanted. And so even when students were living with other students, it wasn't kind of the positive peer interactions that they wanted. So a little bit of a summary of the findings. The CSPs in this study were model programs in the state of Georgia, yet they had no formal logic model before engaging in this evaluation project. They had no process for measuring implementation or fidelity thresholds to their program or logic model. They had no internal evaluation processes in place, and they relied on satisfaction-based assessments and other anecdotal data. Funding impeded program implementation via staff turnover and services varying from semester to semester. And then there was a lack of awareness on campus of the services provided and difficulty identifying students due to that self-identification process. So for lessons learned, it's kind of a mix of limitations, conclusion, but also focusing on like what happened in like the actual thing of evaluation that happened in the process and how that can go better for future either campus support programs doing their own internal evaluation or especially for partnerships between an external evaluator of some kind and a campus support program. So the limitations feed right into that conversation. Student recruitment was really difficult. Part of that was because things were virtual for a large part of the recruitment process. We had some in-person recruitment by program staff at the university that helped get students to do virtual interviews with me. I was the person doing those student interviews and following up with people primarily, in addition to one other person on the team. And that warm handoff, that recruitment by program staff worked much better than emails or even text messages did at either institution. What was I going to say? Oh, and it just like a note on that is that we initially offered $50 for a 1-hour interview, which I think is really, at least in my experience, both at ACT Associates and in my previous research capacities, is a pretty high or at the high end of average. And we ended up increasing that to $75, and it was still really impossible to get recruitment at the technical college and not that much more helpful to get it at the university. So that's still having provided incentives that would kind of make it worth students' very valuable time. It was still very difficult. And then this last point, there was a lot of misunderstandings about the population of interest that the research team was interested in, and communicating that to the staff that resulted in multiple student interviews that could not be used, a focus group that could not be used, and multiple rounds of revised program and administrative data. And I think this is maybe something that is obvious in retrospect, but we thought it was important to note just the importance of really making sure that that is understood at the beginning when you're talking with program staff, especially programs like this. They work with students with experience in foster care as well as students experiencing homelessness. I think there was maybe some misunderstandings at certain points across within our research team that, as you saw, was pretty large, and different people were doing different things, which was very helpful in a division of labor way, but not as helpful when the person doing the logic model and talking to staff about what the program actually was, and then, you know, me coming in to do the interviews and being like, I don't think these students are in foster care, and then realizing, oh, that's why. And so, you know, at the end of the day, we got what we needed. It's just that it resulted in more work on the part of our research team. This is an unfunded research. This is, like I said, based out of that conference, and because we all really care and are interested in these outcomes and this research. But it didn't mean that all the research team was doing it in their own time. So extra work was not unnoticed on our end, but it was also, you know, the program staff has got a lot going on, and the program evaluation is not something that they worked into their daily schedule. So having to go back and ask them to do things again didn't feel great on our end. So just pointing that out is something to think about. And I think this is my last slide of recommendations. We just have some recommendations based on everything I've just said on how to effectively support students with experience in foster care. These are a little bit more kind of higher level policy practices recommendations that colleges and universities need to prioritize the infrastructure, staffing, and evaluation, both to support students, to to have longevity of the program, to have to reduce the variation in supports provided each semester based on funding. And then that evaluation piece of, I don't know about you, but I've worked with a lot of campus support programs, other kinds of programs that if you can't show that it's working, you're never going to get it funded for a long period of time. Sometimes even if you can show it's working, you still don't have the funding for it. But I've seen programs go away when they can't kind of prove that. So the fact that there's so many campus support programs, there's so much effort being put into these kinds of things like designated points of contacts in various states. We are more than 2 decades in and not having a lot of the evaluation or the fidelity to a model to show that this is helping students. And we know anecdotally that it does help students, and it is necessary to help students persist through college. So much policy work has been done to get students to be able to remain in care after 18 and assist with them going to college, and yet we're still not making the strides we want on persisting and completing 2-year, 4-year degrees and certificates. So some other kinds of thoughts around that is that hiring staff with relevant backgrounds is really key, and perhaps a range of backgrounds relevant to the students you're serving, but also to the things you're hoping to provide. So if you're providing case management, having people with experience in case management and case managers, both educationally and experientially. Student affairs, higher education, resident life, all of those things. If you're going to be doing a live-learn community, like I said, there was a lot of feedback on negative experiences in that live-learn community that were a lot of things that you would hear probably in any dorm or house or your own personal house, or your own personal experiences from living with roommates and whatnot. So just having people that's their thing that they do. And then always staff with experience in foster care or homelessness or other kinds of related experiences with whatever programming you're providing can help support students. And then again, research and evaluation are necessary. Then more specifically at a CSP level, researchers can support CSPs in evaluation efforts by helping them develop logic models and data tracking tools. We created, in collaboration with the institutions, a data tracking tool in Excel to help them track their services by student. And both institutions reported that was really helpful for them. I think they had been maybe having attendance records and stuff like that, but the student level longitudinal data tracking was not something that they had been doing before. And creating an Excel spreadsheet is pretty user friendly, at least the ones that we were doing. They weren't fancy, but they just kind of helped people organize and get everything in one place. And then conducting interviews, the staff had anecdotal information from their experiences with students, but it does take a lot of time to both conduct interviews and also analyze them. And so to the extent that researchers or partners with campus support programs can help put in that time for either current participants or helping provide exit interviews when students leave the program, can help provide a more systematic qualitative feedback into the program that is super valuable but time consuming. And so that's where I'm at. I don't know, Jenna, if you want me to keep my slides up in case people want me to go back to them, or I can take them off so I can see people again.
Whichever you prefer is fine. Thanks so much for your presentation. The first comment here is that they would love to see your logic models if you're able to share what those look like.
Yes, I can share. Let me pull up. I have the paper. Let me just try and flip it. And I'll just say while I'm trying to do that, the logic models were kind of, our staff sitting down with the programs and saying like, what do you do? And then, like kind of an iterative process of going back and forth and putting into a logic model format and getting the program staff to review and say, yep, that looks like what we, I don't know why.
Angela Hoffman Cooper said that she could share them. Oh, you got it. Oh yeah, there we go.
Why? Thanks, Angela. Yeah, it's just sideways in my, yeah, and it wasn't letting me twist it. So thanks. Angela is one of the people on the call that I said was on the team. And so this is for the technical college. There are a lot of similarities in these. The university has a little bit more going on because they have those two kind of general and more specific programs. But it was just ended up being a very basic table format. I spend a lot of time looking at logic models, and they can look much fancier, have much more kind of visual aesthetics. But I think for these purposes and then the paper purposes, we just did this simple table. Any other specific questions about the logic models?
They said very helpful. Thank you. We have another question here. What are your next steps? Do you plan to continue to do more work in this area?
As a team or as me specifically?
It was written in a global way, so maybe you could talk a little bit about both, I suppose.
Yeah, so I will say as a team, we are all kind of doing very related things, I think, for students with experience in foster care. I will say that Lori Tiller is one of our was one of our team members, and she is at the J.W. Fanning Institute at UGA. I think that's the, and they do like a lot with Georgia and that that Embark statewide network. So they will be continuing to do lots of things in Georgia. For I think all of the rest of us, we are doing our own different things in the world of foster care.
Hey guys, I'm Jason. I'm over at I'm on the Embark team. I work with Lori closely, and I just wanted to echo that we are in fact continuing on some other trails as we're able, but that is absolutely happening. We appreciate all y'all's work together and all these findings.
Thanks, Jason. I will say just on the personal note, at APT Associates, I don't do a lot of stuff with foster care specifically. I spend most of my days doing stuff in the housing and homelessness space, mostly across the country, as well as, and specifically focused in California. My love and my primary interest is in foster care, everything related to child welfare. I have a background in marriage and family therapy. That's my master's degree. So I've worked both clinically and professionally with people experiencing, or children and families experiencing or involved with the child welfare system. So my dissertation, which might be a future paper and a future presentation here, looked at kind of life path trajectories after 18 for students with experience in foster care in the state of Connecticut, and also their subjective well-being. So I just defended that in August and have yet to do anything more than that with it, but one day.
Thanks for sharing. I had one more question come in. What was your process like in engaging CSPs in this research process? How did you establish buy-in and kind of get them to help in engaging in recruitment of youth?
Yeah, so I think that is often a really hard thing as a researcher. I would say that it was pretty easy in this case because of Lori and the Institute's relationships with the Embark network. It was, and that's kind of, why our team decided to focus there, because we already had someone on our team with relationships with institutions, that it wouldn't be like us cold calling places. And then Lori, kind of based on her relationships and conversations with people, picked the two. We had initially thought that it would be cool to do a technical college and a university that the technical college feeds into the university, which is the case. That's what we chose. But just as I, mentioned all the things that I mentioned, we weren't able to do as much with that as like a feeder institution that we wanted to. But yeah, so basically Lori, and then once some institutions were identified, then some other folks on our team met with all of them and kind of just explained the process. I mean, I won't sugarcoat that it took work on their parts. I think if the campus support program staff were here today, they would say, yes, this wasn't the top priority on their list of things to do sometimes when we were emailing them being like, hey, can you give us this data? Or tell us who, or can you outreach again to students because like we're not getting any responses. I know it was, it added to their workload. On the alternative, I think something that as a researcher you can provide, especially if you're providing it for free, like we were, is that they are getting something out of it. And so we shared all of our findings, we shared the report, they were part of kind of every step, we didn't do a separate report for them, but we shared our findings and the paper before it was submitted. We offered to kind of give them like a summary of a debrief with them, based on, up to them. So I think, we had really good relationships before, which resulted in them being very willing and open and kind about participating in getting us data and connecting us with students. And that was another thing too, like we didn't have to have an IR, we were never collecting PII, because even when we were doing the outreach to students, the staff was doing the outreach and giving our contact information. So the student, by like emailing us, was consenting into that without the program having to give us all of that student contact information or anything like that. So that also made the IRB process a lot easier. But that required the staff to do all that outreach and follow up. So I think that's something that you can do. And that's something I've done with other projects of saying like, we'll give you all of our findings. I think there is a need though for this evaluation work to be part of the funding. And I think that's part of the problem, right? Like the programs are struggling to exist and provide services, and everyone wants to provide more services to students rather than take away from that sometimes very, very, very tiny budget to put towards evaluation services. So to the extent that I don't know if he's still on the call. I don't think he's on the call still, but Preston Brittner was on the call at one point, and he's my advisor. And we have done a lot at the University of Connecticut with high school programs and college campus support programs with students with experience in foster care. And Nate Oppich, who I know has been on here, is at UConn now and was on my committee and is doing evaluation. So to the extent that if you are a researcher and you want to connect with people at your institution to provide some sort of, maybe not actual monetary exchange, but some sort of, waiving of teaching requirements or something to get people within your institution that can help you do this evaluation work, I think there needs to be some carved out resources for the evaluation, because serving more students now sometimes means not being able to serve any students later or understand how to best serve students. So.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any last questions? I think we could have time for one more question if anybody has anything. And if not, we can all part ways as well. Thank you so much for your presentation today and for being here to share your work. As I said before, this information will be available on the webpage within a week or so, if anyone wants to share with others. Thanks so much, and everybody have a great day.